welcome to Soapbox Stories. We're going to get started. I am so thrilled to have you all here tonight. It's really a pleasure. My name is Beth Colt. I'm the owner of Quicks Hole Tavern. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. I was thinking about the importance of stories themselves. How there are myths and stories that create our lives and who we are. And there are moments in your life where you reach for a story that can really change the direction of that day or that year or a person's life. And I remember being here in the summertime when my kids were little. My son was probably about 10, and my husband's a professional writer. He writes for television. And so he handled in our family the Tooth Fairy. He's kind of a night owl, and he created this whole myth of the Tooth Fairy, whose name was Dentalina in our family. And she had really specific handwriting, and she always left a very charming note. And often my kids would write a note back, excited to talk to Dentalina, who was really brought alive by my husband's amazing imagination and his incredible ability to tell a story. So I'm down here for the summer for a few weeks, and my husband is working. He's back on the East Coast, and my 10-year-old son loses a tooth. And I'm like, oh God, I have to do the Tooth Fairy. I got to do it. I've never done the Tooth Fairy. And we have some friends over, and it gets kind of late. My son is long in bed, I'm not much of a night owl. My husband probably did this thing at 2 in the morning all the time. It's like maybe 10:30. I'm like, I'm kind of tired. I'm going to go deal with the Tooth Fairy. So I have a note, I do the whole Dentalina thing, and I go into the bedroom, I open the door, and my 10-year-old son sits up and looks right at me. And I literally dropped to the ground. I'm not, this is embarrassing, okay? I dropped to the ground and I hid on the floor with the idea that maybe he will go back to sleep. And I just lay there on the ground for it felt like 15 minutes, but it was probably 3. And then finally, in the dark, in the silence, he says to me, "Mommy, is that you?" And I'm like, I sat up and I go, yeah, it's me. And he goes, "Are you the Tooth Fairy?" And I said, "Yes, I'm the Tooth Fairy." And he goes, "Does this mean there's no Santa Claus?" And I was like, yeah, there's no Santa Claus either. I was just at a laugh, no words, no stories, no myth, no nothing. And he started to sob. And I got in bed with him, and I started to cry too, and the two of us, racked with tears. The loss, the end of innocence, the loss of childhood. He was broken, and it was so incredibly sad. And I got him to sleep 45 minutes later. And I crept outside, and it's my husband's back on LA time, so it's only 7 o'clock at night. And I call him on the phone, and I'm like, "Honey, I ruined the Tooth Fairy." He's like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, and Santa Claus too." So that's my story, and thank you for hearing it. With that, I would like to introduce Ted Murphy. He's an author. A couple of incredible books for kids and an amazing story for adults, The Running Waves, which is being turned into a movie, being shot right here in Falmouth, so it's very exciting. He's also a teacher. He's been teaching kids how to write and how to tell stories for his whole career, and it is a great honor to introduce the famous Ted Murphy. Welcome.
Thank you, Beth. How do I start? I'm a little devastated hearing about Santa Claus. Really threw me there. First of all, I love being here. I know this is they're filming this for FCTV, so I want to thank Annie via FCTV. I hope she gets better. What she does for a story, to get in an accident with a chipper is unbelievable. I mean, that's crazy. But so tonight I was thinking about what kind of story I would tell, because quite frankly, I'm used to being in front of 400 fourth graders and feeling completely comfortable. Tonight, I am terrified. And I said, you know what? I'm Irish, so I could tell a story that makes everyone cry, and that will be great. But then I thought, you know what? I was talking to my fiancée, Jen, who I love, and she said, tell the story that the kids get to hear that the parents never get to hear. It's a story that I will be in Windfall Market and I will bump into a parent and they'll say, my daughter told me this great story and I kind of remember it from what she said. What is it? And I said, oh, it must be the story about my sister's pet. She goes, yeah. And then I'm in aisle 3 telling a 10-minute story to that mom. Well, tonight I want to tell this story, and I also want to tell it in honor of, see, I'm Irish, I'm getting choked up. In honor of my sister Sarah Murphy, who does do a lot of PR for Quicks Hole, who couldn't be here today. Sarah is one of my best friends, but this story is not about now, it's about then. When I was 7, Sarah was 5. And Sarah was different because she had a pet, but it wasn't a dog or a cat or a goldfish or a gerbil or a snake. Sarah had a pet periwinkle. Now, for people who don't know what a periwinkle is, I hope you do, we're on Cape Cod, but a periwinkle is basically from the snail family, and they're round, they're shaped like a marble almost, and they stick to the jetties down at the beach, you know, the big rocks at the beach. And Sarah loved this periwinkle that she would carry around in a purple bucket, and she'd always talk to it. And she'd say, come on now, Peter Periwinkle, come on. Oh my gosh, you're the most beautiful periwinkle in the world. Isn't he a beautiful periwinkle? And I look at her and I'd say, Sarah, it's a periwinkle. They all look alike. And she said, no, he's absolutely beautiful. Well, she would do this every day. And I'm not saying I'm right, you know, and this was a good thing, but I was 7 and she was 5, so one day I kind of started teasing her about the periwinkle. And she said, stop teasing me, and my mom came out and she said, Ted, I want you to take the dog for a walk. So we had this big, great day, and I said, okay, and she said, and Sarah wants to go with you. And I said, okay, come on, Sarah. And she said, wait 1 second, and she went over, and she got her bucket, and she said, Peter, time for your daily walk. And we walked around the neighborhood, and she kept talking to the periwinkle, and I just couldn't take it anymore. So when we got home, I looked at the periwinkle, and I said, Sarah, Peter Periwinkle, he doesn't look good. And she said, what do you mean, Teddy? I said, I think he's dead. And she said, he's not dead, he looks alive, and he smells alive. Oh my gosh, Teddy, he's up my nose. And I said, no, really, what happened? Well, did you drop him? No, I sniffed him up my nose by mistake. And I felt her nose, and I looked up her nose, and I went, oh man, it really is up there. And she said, what are we gonna do? I think we should tell Mommy and Daddy. Well, I figured if I told my mom and dad and I had been teasing her, I'd get in trouble. So naturally, I said, Sarah, whatever you do, don't tell Mom and Dad, or you're gonna get in trouble. And she said, well, that makes no sense. I sniffed him up my nose by mistake. I said, hey, I'm 7 and you're 5. I think I know a little bit more about the periwinkle up the nose. And she said, okay, well, you gotta do something. So I said, I know what I'll do. So I went over and I got my friend Mark, and Mark was 8 and I was 7, so Mark was filled with wisdom. And I told him about the periwinkle, and he felt her nose and looked up her nose and went, oh man, it really is up her nose. And I said, yeah, what are we gonna do? He said, I don't know. I think we could sell tickets. I bet you Joe Crowley'd want to see that. I said, no, I don't want anyone to see it. I gotta get it out of her nose, man. And he said, I know what to do. So he ran into my house and he came back out and he said, Sarah, put your nose out. So she put her nose out and he put all this pepper under her nose. And she's sniffing, achoo. No, he's really stuck. And I said, he's really stuck. I went, I know what to do. So I ran into the house and I came back out and I said, Sarah, put your nose out. So she put her nose out and I put this stick of butter up her nose. I thought I'd grease it out. And she's going, oh, butter, that's so gross. Oh, poor Peter Periwinkle's gonna think you're trying to cook him or something. So that wasn't working. So then Mark and I started talking again, and Mark said, I know what to do. So he ran into the house and he came back out. He said, Sarah, put your nose out. So she put her nose out. And he put these tweezers up her nose to tweeze it out. And she's going, oh no, tweezers, you're gonna kill poor Peter Periwinkle. Well, you guys, another 5 minutes pass, and we don't know what we're gonna do. And at this point, we're about to give up, and I said, I got it. And I ran back in, and I came back out. I said, Sarah, put your nose up. Well, right now, at this point, she didn't want to put her nose out. She said, I don't know about this thing. I said, hey, do you want that thing stuck up your nose your whole life? And she said, well, no. And so she put her nose out, and I put this plunger on her face to plunge it out. And she's going, oh, plunge it. Oh, that's so disgusting. That's beyond disgusting. So 2 hours passed, people, and Peter Periwinkle's still stuck up there. And we're about to give up when my dad comes home and he says, hey everyone, we're going to McDonald's. And back then, all 6 kids going to McDonald's, that was a big deal. So we're like, yeah, McDonald's, woohoo, yeah. And Sarah takes me aside, she goes, yeah, but what about the periwinkle up my nose? I said, you told Dad about the periwinkle now, we're not going to get any Happy Meals. And she thought about that, she said, okay, okay, I won't. And she said, but you got to get him out of my nose, this is getting ridiculous. I said, I'll think of something. So we went to McDonald's, and Mark got to go with us, and Mark and I are eating our quarter pounders, and we're talking, and Mark said, I don't know, we could try a wrench. And I said, nah, that would break the shell, might even break her nose, that's not a good idea. And we look over, and we see Sarah, and she's shoving a French fry up her nose. And my dad looks over, he goes, Sarah, take that French fry out of your nose. And she takes the French fry out of her nose, dips it in ketchup, and then shoves it back up her nose. And my dad goes, oh my gosh. So he goes over, and the French fry is dangling out of her nose. There's ketchup everywhere. He pulls it out of her nose. He goes, young lady, what are you doing? And she said, I'm not supposed to tell you. Teddy says I'll get in trouble. He says, well, Ted, what is going on here? And I go, well, Dad, it's fairly simple. Sarah sniffed a periwinkle up her nose. He said, what? And then my mom felt her nose, and she looked up her nose, and she said, oh my gosh, I really think it's that periwinkle she's always carrying around in her bucket. And my father went, oh my gosh. He goes, when did this happen? And I said, I don't know, like 2 hours ago? He said, 2 hours? And my dad said, my friend said, no, I think it's more like 3 hours. He goes, 3 hours? He goes, everyone get in the car. So we get in the station wagon, and my dad drives like a maniac to the Falmouth Hospital. And he runs in the hospital, and he goes, you gotta help me, there's been a horrible accident. And the nurse said, what, a car accident? No. What, is your wife having another baby? Oh God, no. No, it's my daughter. She sniffed a periwinkle up her nose. And the nurse looked at him, and she goes, oh really, I think we have a disturbed man over here. And he said, hey, you'd be disturbed too if your daughter had a periwinkle up her nose. And she said, calm down, sir. I'm sure it's not a periwinkle up her nose. And sure enough, Sarah walked up, and she goes, no, it's up there. You want to take a look? And the nurse looked, and she went, oh my gosh, okay, let me get the doctor. So she called the doctor, and the doctor came in, and he said, what is going on here? And my dad said, well, my daughter, she sniffed Peter Periwinkle up her nose. He said, Peter Periwinkle? What are you talking about? He said, well, she has a pet periwinkle. He said, well, who has a pet periwinkle? He goes, that's beside the point. It's up her nose. You got to help me. He goes, okay, calm down, sir. And he started laughing. He goes, I've been trained to deal with the periwinkle up the nose. He goes, let's go in the other room. So we go into the other room, and the doctor goes over, and he pulls out these tweezers, and they're about that big. And Sarah's eyes were like saucers, and she said, they already tried tweezers on me. And they said, they tried tweezers on you? Oh yeah, and pepper, and butter, oh, and a plunger. And my dad and the doctor looked at me, and they said, we will talk to you later, Ted. And the doctor said, it's okay, all I want you to do, and she said, I know, stick my nose out. So she stuck her nose out, and the doctor put the tweezers up her nose, and her head went back and forth and back and forth. And finally, the periwinkle went shooting over his shoulder. And he said, I got it. How does that feel? And she went, oh yeah, that's much better. And she said, where's Peter Periwinkle? And the doctor was still laughing. He goes, I don't even know where that thing landed. And now she said, I want Peter Periwinkle, I want Peter Periwinkle. So we all started looking for the periwinkle. And after about 5 minutes, my brother goes, and he was about 2 years old, he goes, Daddy, I found the periwinkle. And my father said, where is it? He goes, Daddy, it's stuck on the side of your head. And my dad felt the periwinkle and took it off, and he handed it to my sister. And he said, no more sniffing periwinkles, young lady. And the doctor said, wow, that was a close one. And my father said, really? He said, yeah. Imagine if she had a pet quahog. So that's local Cape humor right there. But the point of me telling this story tonight is, lately we see so much, I don't know, anger on Facebook and things like that. And we're forgetting those family stories. And I wanted to tell you folks this story today, to look at that fourth grader that you just had laughs with your friends. Remember that, you know? And I always tell my students, all my students, is the family stories are the ones that we have to keep, that we have to pass on. Now, my sister Sarah's not too happy that I keep passing this story on, but God love her, that she once saw me tell this story to a group of fourth graders at the North Falmouth School. And after, I said, Sarah, I said, can I keep telling it? She said, you have to, because they loved it. So think of those stories that make you guys laugh. Turn off those cell phones at the dinner table and pass those stories on. I implore you. And thank you for letting me share my story.
Wow, that was so good. I will never look at Sarah Murphy the same again. I'm sure you'll all agree with me. I am pleased to introduce our second teller tonight. Melinda Gallant is an improv actress, artist. She teaches improv for adults at Katuitt Center for the Arts. She's a sketch comedy performer. She directs. And she's here with us tonight. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Melinda Gallant. And I will note that we do have a microphone here for the Falmouth TV. So you stay close this way. You'll be fine. You don't care.
Can hear me.
Yeah, I'm sure. Good.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. Annie, we wish you were here. I've done a lot of things with you, some of them wild and crazy. So this is another wild and crazy. It's very difficult to follow people who tell wonderful stories. Now, Beth, I had no idea, told wonderful stories, and she did. Damn her. And then we got this guy over here who says, well, I don't normally tell stories. Then he gets up and he tells a great story. Damn you. So, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's about the summer of '66. Who remembers the summer of '66? Some of us were around then. Yes, we were. Anyway, my story about the summer of '66 was, it was the best summer ever. Oh, I was between my junior and senior year in high school, I was thin. I had long blonde hair. I rode horses. Oh, maybe I ought to digress a little bit. I grew up on a farm in the middle of Ohio, and so I will say to you, O-H-I-O. So that's where I grew up. And it was a wonderful way of life and a wonderful existence. Now, I was the last of Farmer Smith's daughters. I was number 5. And when I was born, my oldest sister was 20. Yeah. And we peered down from there, and then my brother, who was next to me, was 8 years older. So when I came along, my father was almost 50, and so as I was growing up, he was in his 60s when I was a teenager. And to be a 60-year-old man with a teenager in the 60s was kind of interesting. But as I was growing up, I actually thought that my name was Goddamn. I thought my name was Goddamn Melinda. And I'm not kidding you, because when my father would say, Goddamn Melinda, what have you done? Goddamn Melinda, did you close the gate for the horses? Goddamn Melinda. Now, in today's world, that would be considered child abuse. But back then, no, it was just goddamn. So keep that in mind. So it was the summer of '66, and I was going to have a great summer. I had been voted, you guys probably don't believe this, but it's true, Miss Delaware County Horseman. Yes, I still have the sash to prove it. And I was going to run in the Miss Ohio Western Horse Association pageant. I was one of the people in the Miss Ohio, and I ended up a runner-up, but that's another story. And I was lifeguarding at a camp, so that was great. I was tan. I was a summer blonde. It was good. But the one thing that my mother made me do was take typing. Everybody here take typing in high school? Everybody took typing. Well, I put it off as long as I could. And I took typing, and the teacher was the football coach. His name was Wells, Mr. Wells. And he was really only about 24, 25. He was right out of college. And of course, the rumor was that he was dating all the senior cheerleaders. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. But there was a lot of indication that he probably was. So the first day of typing, I go in and I have my book, and they're very ancient typewriters. There wasn't even a Selectric typewriter around then. And my grandsons get very hysterical when I tell them that we didn't get computers until like about 10 years ago. So they get crazy over that stuff. But it was just a regular typewriter, big old, kind of an upright typewriter with the thing, ding, ding. And so I went and I looked, and we had to type the big brown Reddy Fox jumps over the fence, or wall. I think it was a wall, but it doesn't matter. And so I had to type that. So I did T-H-E, and so on and so forth. So the guy came over to me, who was the teacher, Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells came over and he looked at me, and he said, Melinda, I need to see you out in the hall. And I thought to myself, well, what did I do? Well, I haven't done anything wrong. You guys have to see me. So he takes me out in the hall, and he asks me if I'd ever had a debilitating disease. Because he said, you obviously have no eye-hand coordination. And during that time, in the early 50s, kids had polio. And in our community, there were several children that had polio. And he wanted to know if I was one of them. I pointed out to him that I wasn't. And I then went in, picked up my books, and left. I have never learned to type since then. But the best part of this story comes now. Because that was a bad day. I'd had a bad day. But I was dating this really kind of cool guy, and he was getting ready to graduate, and he was just really something. And he's now my current husband. And what's really interesting, I always say current husband, because if I say we've been married 48 years, people go, that's really weird. And it is. Even our grandchildren sometimes go, that's weird. So he came to my house, because you had to call people on a real telephone back then. And he called me up and he goes, what's the matter? I said, I just had a terrible day. He goes, you know what? He goes, I know some friends of mine, Bill Heald and a couple other guys, and their girlfriends are going to go up to the dam, which was a place where, does everybody know what a dam is? Because it wasn't like out here. There wasn't water everywhere. There's very little water. So they dammed up this river, and that's where you would go to have recreational boating and all of this. So we were going to go up to the dam to visit our friends, and they were going to build a bonfire, and it was going to be fun, and there'd be a little bit of kissing and, all that kind of stuff. So we go up there. Now, my husband had just gotten, his dad had bought for him a red Volkswagen Beetle convertible. Pretty cool. Very nice. See why I dated him? Of course, now he drives a Kia, so we won't go there. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so we go up to the dam, and we drive in to the dam area, and you know how they have in parks those big posts, right? They kind of delineate parking areas. They're like a half a log into the ground. So we drive in there. We're driving through, and he sees the friends that we're going to visit with, and he pulls in, and he pulls around, and I go, oh yeah, Joe, that's it. There's Bill. He's waiting. Hi, Bill. And Joe goes, hi, Bill. And boom. We hit one of those logs. Speaking of Annie, we hit one of those logs. Now, this is before seat belts, so I know why they have seat belts. So you have to remember, I had long blonde hair, and of course that day it was hot, so I wore it in a ponytail on top of my head. Very cute. I went forward, hit his windshield with the top of my head, and a hole went through the windshield, and my ponytail went through the windshield. So he was stopped dead. The car stopped. He looks over, and he goes, Melinda, I think we have a problem. And I went, well, I can't move my head. It hurts. And he goes, well, your ponytail's outside the car. I went, what? True story. So he goes, wait a minute. He goes, I know what I'll do. He goes, let me see if I have a pocket knife, and I'll just cut it off at the window. So he pulls out his pocket knife, God's honest truth, and he saws. Now you know what a pen knife, he saws off, this much of hair that's sticking outside the car, not all of it, but most of it. And then he takes my head and pulls it back. So not only did he cut off the ponytail, anything else that was stuck in the window was pulled out as well. So now I'm leaning back in the car, and he looks, and I said, am I bleeding? He goes, it's really amazing, you're not. So I'm feeling around my head, and all I can feel is this giant lump right on my head. And so he backs up starts the car, backs up the car, and we head for my house, which was probably 5 miles away. So we go back to my house. So you have to imagine, though, there is still hair stuck outside of the window as we're driving down the streets. So we get back to my house, which is a big farmhouse on a farm, and we drive in the driveway, and we had outside lights that automatically came on. And my mom was at the kitchen. She was always at the kitchen, at the sink, and we always knew when she knew something was up because she'd start screaming, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" So as we drove in, she could see something hanging out the front and that the window was smashed. So she started yelling. What did she yell? "Oh my God! Oh my God!" So my father, who was usually by that time, prone on the couch, got up and came and looked out the door and opened the screen door, and it slammed shut. And he's standing there. Now, he's the one who ran into everything, right? Are we agreed on that? It was his fault, right? I mean, I'm just a passenger. So he looks at the car with the ponytail sticking out the other side, and he says, "God damn, Melinda, what have you done now?" True story. And if anybody says to you, "Oh, I know Melinda Gallant," yeah, she's that woman who's from Sandwich and does crazy things. Now you'll know why. Thank you. Not as good as yours.
Amazing story. I love it. This is a great night. We're going to take a little break. We're going to clear. We're going to bring some dessert. And I'll tell you one small story based on Melinda's amazing story. She's been married a very long time. I have also been married a long time. And my husband has step-parents on both sides. I've been married 25 years, and I have a wonderful husband. At one point, my same son, who I told you the tooth fairy story about, said to me, just out of the blue one day, "When am I going to have a stepfather?" And I said, "Only time will tell." With that, and we're going to get dessert out, and then we've got one more story, so enjoy. Thank you. I'm so pleased to be back to introduce a very famous person here in Falmouth. And you all know Troy Clarkson. He has the all-important Troy's Take in the Falmouth Enterprise, which we read weekly and is always delightful. And he's published several amazing books. If you don't own them, you should buy them. I'm sure they're available on Amazon and other places. 8 Cousins, a wonderful place to visit. And he also is president of the Sober Living Foundation, and he is part of the Carousel of Light. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Troy Clarkson as our final speaker of the evening.
Thank you, Beth, very much. Before I start, I think we need to have a moment of truth here. Now, you need to be honest when I ask this question and raise your hand. If when Melinda told her story, you said to yourselves, that goddamn Melinda, how did she wind up marrying that guy? Right? With all due respect, of course. You both look great after 48 years. So, I don't have a funny story to tell, but I thought that given the events of the last week or so in this area and how we've been honoring brave police officers, that maybe I would tell a story about a brave police officer that I know. Oh, thank you. So I'll start by telling you that I have a very hard head. And I've proven that. I mean, not that I'm stubborn, although my wife may disagree, but I mean physically I have a very hard head. And I've proven that several times in my life. When I was, I guess about 10 years old, my sister was celebrating her first communion, and we had a big party at the house, lots of family and friends over, and of course everyone was fawning over my beautiful young sister in her first communion gown, and I didn't appreciate that the attention and adulation was going toward my sister and not me. So I attempted a stunt that I had tried many times successfully before, and in my home, the staircase to go upstairs was right in front of the front door, which was, like many front doors, not used often. It was just really more decorative. And on that front door, there were these beautiful, huge, decorative hinges. And I went up to the 7th step on the staircase, and to prove my acrobatic skills, jumped from there to land on the landing. And of course, I misjudged it and jumped too hard and too far, and I landed right on the front door, and my head hit the hinge and cracked open. I'm getting to the police officer part. So everyone was celebrating, and I needed to go to the hospital and get stitches. And so my Uncle Craig put me in the back of his big Gran Torino station wagon and drove me to the hospital where I got stitches. And I was okay. And it was a few years later where I was actually babysitting at Uncle Craig's house, and he brought me home, and I heard the words that no 13-year-old boy should hear, and my mother came up to me and said, your dad died today. And after crying for a little bit, I wound up in the arms of Uncle Craig, who said, I'll always be here. And he's always been there. So remember, I have a very hard head, and it wasn't long after that where I was on my paper route, on my appointed rounds in Fisherman's Cove off of Davisville Road in East Falmouth, delivering newspapers on a Sunday morning, and it was a cold, windy day. This was in the winter, but it was kind of like a day like today. And in my mind, to this day, I was always going a million different directions, and I was singing a song to no one else other than myself, riding my bike, not paying attention, and I drove my bike right into a parked truck at the house next to mine and cracked my head open, not too far from the spot where I had done it a few years before. In fact, the scar is still over my eye. And I got home, and of course my hat and my head were filled with blood. Thankfully, they didn't cut my hair off. But Uncle Craig came and took me to the hospital and got me stitched up. He's always been there. And what I've learned over the years, actually, was that people throughout this community have similar stories of times of trouble and strife and tragedy in their lives, and Uncle Craig was there. Because I know him as Uncle Craig, my dad's brother. Many of you know him as Sergeant Craig Clarkson, a 30-year veteran of the Falmouth Police Department. And I tell his story because he was omnipresent in the community, was always around and visible and engaged in the community. He was a runner. He ran the Falmouth Road Race, 20 times. And when he wasn't running the Falmouth Road Race, he was training for it, and he could be seen running throughout the town, always with a smile, always willing to stop and talk to someone, always willing to be there. He hasn't been as visible in the most recent past, and the reason for that is he's been very courageously struggling with and fighting a debilitating brain disease. But please, do not for a second feel badly for Uncle Craig, because he has handled that challenge and that tragedy with the same commitment that he's given to everyone whom he's ever encountered. When he couldn't run or jog anymore, he got a recumbent bike and would bike down the bike path with my aunt, his ever-present and amazing wife, Peggy. When he could no longer ride the recumbent bike, he had a stationary bike. Today, he gets around with the help of a walker or a wheelchair, but he is still omnipresent. When his daughter, my cousin Krista, was married just a few months ago, Uncle Craig was on the dance floor in his wheelchair, sharing a wonderful family memory with everyone that was there. So as we think about and honor brave police officers as this terrible, terrible tragedy occurred just miles down the road, and contemplate what it means to be brave and to have a commitment to others and to be there, Uncle Craig is just a shining example for all of us. I bet if I went around this room, there would be people here that would have stories about him and what he's meant to them. The story I just told, I actually wrote in a newspaper column a couple of months ago that some of you may have read. According to Beth, everybody reads it, so you better have read it. And I was amazed, as much as I know the amazing man that he is and what he's contributed to this community after I wrote the column. The outpouring of examples, and people from all walks of life, from Yale to jail, literally. The stories that people shared with me about what he has meant in their lives. And so there's really a lesson. There's a lesson in that life well lived. And those lessons are being taught to us every day because he continues to live courageously and with gratitude and teaching all of us those important lessons every day. So his simple lesson was and is to love one another, to be there, family first, to love one another, and just to live your lives. So no matter what challenge or what tragedy may befall you in your coming days and weeks and months, if you happen to get hit by a chipper from a landscape truck, the lesson in this life well lived is just to live every day. And so I'm so grateful to be able to tell this wonderful story of Uncle Craig, and so blessed to be able to share it with you. And should you choose to applaud at the end of this story, I ask that you do so not for me, but for Uncle Craig. Thank you.